Chola Shivliv is in the Black Irish in Montserrat. Shaw Twirish O'Rourke.
Unfortunately, it's a bit far to take the wife and family. To be precise, 4,128 miles from Cork, give or take a few. It's on the Emerald Isle, all right, and they'll feel quite at home among its Atlantic beaches, green fields, harps and shamrocks. But the trouble is that this Kinsale is at the wrong side of the Atlantic. It's Kinsale in Montserrat, a West Indian island, the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean, and home of a unique race of people, the Black Irish.
It was under the press ganging of Cromwell that hundreds of people from Cork, Kilkenny and Drogheda were expelled to the West Indies. They would have arrived just as the first importations of African slaves took place. So, both cruelly uprooted from their homes, Irish and African Negro shared a common suffering, a common grievance, and for the most part lived together in peace and common understanding. The home of Mr. and Mrs. Allen is also the local post office. Their soft accents are typical of Montserrat and might easily be confused with the lilt in parts of West Cork.
Now, how did the family come to Montserrat, Mr. Allen?
Well, the Irish people came to Montserrat on account of Cromwell, where it was exile. We heard they had some fighting there, and the Irish people came and it was inside. So they was sent out of the island. So and we are some of the older descendants.
We have Allens, Daly, Sweeney's, Ryan.
They're all related to you, are they?
They are all one relation.
There's a spot in me heart which no Colleen may own. There's a depth in me soul never sounded unknown. Sure I love the dear silver that shines in your hair, and the brow that's all furrowed and wrinkled with care. I kiss the dear fingers so toil-worn for me. Oh, God bless you and keep you, Mother McCree.
Fire! He was the founder of parliamentary democracy. Fire! He killed a king and by his actions created a constitutional monarchy. He was a hero and the father of the modern British Army. He pacified Ireland. On no figure in British history is opinion so divided. He is Oliver Cromwell, but some say he was a rebel, a religious bigot, and a slaughterer of the innocent. I'm Major Gordon Conrigan. I've always been fascinated by military leadership. I'm going to find out what made Cromwell, with no previous experience of soldiering, into the finest military commander of his age.
Fire!
In the mid-1600s, Britain was in the grip of a vicious civil war. The supporters of the monarchy, the Cavaliers, fought for power against the parliamentarians. Or Roundheads. Oliver Cromwell was the most remarkable of many remarkable men who bore arms in the civil wars of the mid-17th century. His achievement was first and foremost a military one. Within 2 years, he rose from being a lowly captain gathering together a troop of volunteers to being the senior cavalry commander for the parliamentarians against the king. In my opinion, one reason for his remarkable success was his personality. He was so tough, his soldiers called him Old Ironsides, and so down to earth that he demanded his portrait be painted warts and all. There are more clues to Cromwell the man in a tourist trail in Huntingdon, his hometown. Admiring remarks made by his contemporaries are inscribed on special stones. A great man, risen from a very low and afflicted condition. But hang on, this is a descendant of Henry VIII's Chancellor, Thomas Cromwell. He's got at least one titled uncle. He's a landowner. He doesn't exactly come from a low and afflicted condition, surely.
It's an exaggeration, but there's an important truth in it. He comes down from a younger son, and in those days, the younger son doesn't get the wealth, the elder one does. I mean, he's not in poverty, and that overstates it, but the idea is that he is someone who is connected to riches, but has very little wealth himself. One would certainly see him as someone who wouldn't normally exercise any real political clout in that society, let alone be head of state.
To understand how and why Cromwell became such a great military commander, it's necessary to understand the politics of the time. King Charles I had dissolved Parliament. Men like Cromwell, who wanted a less autocratic government, came to realise that only war could moderate Charles's rule. The causes of the Civil War were social, religious and economic. But essentially, it was all about power. A weak and incompetent king clinging to his divine right to rule was opposed by a combination of people who wanted power for themselves. Some of them were simply covering personal greed and ambition with a cloak of morality and righteousness, while others genuinely believed that royal government was oppressive and that the king had to be controlled. This is Broughton Castle in Oxfordshire, where men like Cromwell met to plot the downfall of the king. Lord Say, this is your ancestor, Nathaniel Fiennes, who was a prominent parliamentarian. Why did he and Cromwell oppose the monarchy and ultimately want to get rid of it?
Well, they opposed it because Charles I ruled without Parliament for 11 years. It was a totally autocratic society. If you wanted to express your opinion, you had no means of doing so. There was no Parliament where anybody could express their opinions. And I think it was natural for a liberal-minded man to oppose the king and, in the long run, to support Cromwell.
Cromwell's success as a great commander was partly due to sheer strength of character. The fact that men like Nathaniel Fiennes, his social superiors, were prepared to back him is proof of that.
Oh, there's Old Ironsides.
Yes, that's a contemporary picture of Cromwell by Walker, who was the court painter, as it were. Tradition has it that the parliamentary leaders gathered up here before the Civil War. Nobody could listen in on these three outside walls, just one sentry outside the door, and then you could speak in private and plot against your autocratic king.
And I think Now, many of his contemporaries had these skills too, but Cromwell had something more: vision. And nowhere is this better demonstrated than in his recruitment and training of troops, and in his eventual command of the new model army, which, by combining all sorts of local forces into one, produced England's first truly national modern army. There were four basic principles underlying Cromwell's military policy. First of all, only well-behaved men were allowed to serve. Secondly, soldiers had to believe in the morality of the cause. Thirdly, for the first time, there was a proper rank structure and proper rules and regulations. And finally, he emphasised teamwork. Royalist cavalry individually were far better than the parliamentarians. But Cromwell's men, by acting as a team, could see off far larger bodies of royalists who were generally pretty reluctant to take orders from anybody. Cromwell was one of the first modern protagonists of military professionalism.
The Civil War had been raging for 3 years with no decisive outcome. It was at Naseby in 1645 that Cromwell would use the cavalry of the new model army to dramatic effect. It was a decisive and glorious victory that would be the turning point of the war and ultimately change the way England was ruled.
On the 14th of June, 1645, the Parliamentarian army, with Cromwell in command of the cavalry, met the Royalist army under Prince Rupert. The Parliamentarians were spread along this ridge. Cromwell had the cavalry of the right wing off to the east, and the 10,000-strong Royalist army was on the northerly ridge. At first, things went well for the Royalists. Prince Rupert's cavalry charged the Parliamentarians' left wing and drove their horse off the field. But then, in typical Royalist cavalry fashion, they went off on a private jolly to plunder the Parliamentarian baggage train, and they didn't come back, leaving their own infantry unsupported.
God save the King! God save the King! God save the King!
The Royalist infantry launched a full-scale attack on the Parliamentarians. Cromwell seized the moment and attacked with his cavalry, driving off the Royalists.
The Parliamentarian infantry then advanced, and they started to push the Royalists all the way back. The Royalists who weren't killed wouldn't surrender until the King could get away. But at the end of the day, the King had lost his best infantry and effectively the war.
It was a magnificent victory for Cromwell and the new model army. But something a lot less savoury also happened at Naseby, and it's a hint of a darker side to Cromwell, a ruthlessness as a commander.
The Parliamentarians, chasing the fleeing remnants of the Royalist army, caught up with the Royalist baggage train, which was manned by civilians, including women.
The parliamentarians killed the men, and they cut the noses and the lips off the women, thinking they were Irish. In fact, they were probably Welsh. Cromwell wasn't there. He didn't passionately do it, but he didn't do much to punish the perpetrators.
Now it was just a matter of time before Parliament was victorious and the King called to account, tried and executed at Westminster. Naseby wouldn't be the last occasion that Cromwell showed brutality rather than humanity on the battlefield. He now embarked on the most ruthless campaign in Ireland ever undertaken by the British. Cromwell's professionalism secured victory at Naseby, but he also revealed the ruthlessness for which he became infamous in Ireland. So does this brutal streak undermine his right to be called a great commander? Some of the things he did are pretty unpleasant.
So what happened in Ireland? Well, in Ireland, he enters into a cycle of violence. The most recent thing had been a massacre of Protestants by Catholics, and he comes to avenge that, and he says so specifically.
This one says toleration was his masterpiece. Well, that's got to be a joke. The man was a thoroughgoing bigot, wasn't he?
No, he's tolerant in England, but not in Ireland. That pretty much sums it up, I think.
Cromwell conducted a highly successful military campaign in Ireland that crushed a royalist revival. But his brutal suppression of Irish Catholics left a legacy of hatred that remains to this day.
We were always kind of terrified of the thought of Oliver Cromwell when we were kids ever coming back again, you know. So it was so horrible.
Oliver Cromwell, he wouldn't be too popular in this country.
They destroyed the whole town, more or less, you know what I mean? Killed everyone in it and burnt the place to the ground, so...
Oliver Cromwell's reputation in Ireland is very, very bad. Very bad.
He would be regarded as being a tyrannical conqueror.
I can't tell you any more. My memory doesn't go that far.
This is Drogheda, a few miles north of Dublin. It was held by a royalist garrison under Sir Arthur Aston. Now, he only had one leg, but he was a tough old soldier. He said, "He who can take Drogheda could take hell." Cromwell would give him hell. On the 19th of September, 1649, Cromwell laid siege to the town. He lined up his cannon here on Cromwell Mount, and he began to bombard the town walls. Meanwhile, the infantry had moved off down this hill to their position for the attack. Once the cannon had managed to breach the walls, it was time for the assault. The troops started off down here. They're laden down with muskets, ammunition, swords, helmets, all the kit, and then they have to get all the way up that hill under very heavy fire from the defenders on the wall. It's no wonder the first two attacks were just blown away. This is where they were trying to break through the walls. Fire! And now Cromwell personally took command. Sword in hand, he led a third and final charge on the breach. There was fierce hand-to-hand fighting here, but eventually the English prevailed. Thousands of parliamentarian soldiers flooded through the gap and on to the town. The defenders retreated here to Mill Mount, and Cromwell ordered that no prisoners were to be taken. His soldiers beat Sir Arthur Aston to death with his own wooden leg, and then proceeded to put everyone else within reach to the sword. The defenders retreated still further, across the river to St. Peter's Church, where nearly 1,000 of them were killed by Cromwell's soldiers. The last few Irish troops took refuge in the steeple, and Cromwell had the pews set on fire to try and smoke them out. Most of them were, but some of them were burnt to death. Over 3,000 people perished in Drogheda. Cromwell had every surviving officer shot, and 1 in 10 of the soldiers clubbed to death. The rest he sent to Barbados, and not on holiday either.